We're still taking a look at the new features in Houdini 20, and one of the large new features in that release is the new Clouds workflow. Now, Houdini has had Clouds tools since I think 2017. However, with those old cloud tools, if you wanted to have a realistic cloud in the end, you had to build a lot of your own custom tools. And this is something that's pretty much completely gone with Houdini 20 now. You can use all the tools that Houdini gives you to get pretty much every feature you need from a cloud without building too much custom stuff. So let's try this out. And in an empty scene, let's drop down a geocontainer. Let's dive inside, and to create a cloud, the first node that we want to drop down begins with the keyword cloud shape. We got 5 different versions of those cloud shape tools. We have a general cloud shape generate node, which is simply a procedural generator for our cloud shapes. We can base them on a polygon mesh or on a line. And we got 2 additional nodes, the cloud shape from intersection and the cloud shape replicate, which can add additional detail to the cloud shape that we're feeding in. In this case, I want to start out with a cloud shape generate node. Let's drop this down. Let's center a view here, and as you can see, we get a simple procedural cloud shape which consists of a lot of scattered primitive spheres. And we also got a lot of parameters to tweak the cloud shape. Now, one word of advice for this node right here, or for the cloud shape in general. The cloud shape in this new cloud workflow will have quite a large influence over the shape of the cloud that you're getting out in the end. A lot more influence than with the old cloud tools. So my word of advice here is to really dial all those values in to get a cloud to your liking before you move on, for example, to the more advanced cloud noises, because again, this really has a lot of influence over the final cloud that you're getting in the end. In this case, I'm going to leave the cloud species at mediocres. This is sort of a preset on how those clouds are generated. I'm going to set the shape offset to 2. This is sort of a seed value. And the main thing that I'm going to look for here is to get some nice exposed parts of our general cloud shape in here and those large gaps. I think this makes for a silhouette that's a lot more interesting in the end, and also in general something that highlights a lot more interesting features in the noises and later in the shading. What I'm also going to set is an initial size, and again this is one of these parameters that is really important in the new cloud workflow. Basically this sets the main size of a cloud, so if I set this to a value of 10, our cloud is now 10 times bigger, and in general the overall size of the cloud has influence over a lot of the noises that we're going to add later, as well as shading. So if you're, for example, matching the cloud from another artist or another setup that you saw online, it's really important to work with the same initial size here. For now, this is all I want to do in here, but I do want to tweak this cloud shape in here a bit further, and for this I'm going to use a noise, or I'm going to introduce a noise. Let's drop down a mountain node and wire this in. On this mountain node, let's disable noise along vector because those primitive spheres don't have normal vectors. And let's dial in our noise values in here. I'm going to set the amplitude to a value of 3, and I'm going to set the element size to a value of 7. And my goal here basically is to pull my different cloud shapes apart even more, create even more gaps, and generally make the shape even more interesting. And the final thing that I want to do here is dial in an offset that I like, and for this cloud that I'm building here, I liked an offset of 0.4 a lot. Now if we take a look at a cloud from a profile angle, for example from the front, we can see our cloud has a really uneven bottom, which is not really realistic. So let's now try to flatten this a bit more. For this we have a new node in Houdini called Flatten. This also works on simple meshes, but it's pretty much purpose-built to work with those cloud sphere primitives. We can make it respect the p-scale attribute that each of those cloud spheres has, so that all of the bottom ends of all those spheres sit right on one plane. And we can set the distance of that plane. In this case, for this cloud, I want to set my clipping plane to a value of -0.5, and I want to bring in a transform node above my flatten node, and I want to use this to simply push my cloud down to flatten it to a specific plane. And in this case, I'm going to choose a value of -1. And what I'm looking for here while flattening, if I take a look at the bottom, is I want some large parts that are quite flat, and then also some parts that are still a lot more irregular. And I think this makes for a more interesting cloud shape in the end. Now we're done with our main cloud shape. It's finally time to move on to volumes, and to turn my cloud into a volume, since this is all primitive spheres, I can use a VDB from particles node. Wire this in. For now I'm going to leave the voxel size at a value of 0.1, but later I'm going to up this to say 0.05 or 0.025 to get my final render resolution. What I need to do, however, is change the VDB type from distance to fog. And now this is the main cloud that I'm going to work with. I want to clip the bottom of our cloud a bit further, make it even flatter, and for this, there's a new cloud clip node. Let's wire this down. This does flatten our cloud a bit already, and I could, for example, use this distance slider to again set my clipping plane or add some noise to my clipping, but for now I'm just going to set the distance to 0 and turn off the noise to simply get a simple flat bottom. With this done, the next node in our cloud system, or cloud builder, is a cloud adjust density profile node. And this is something that we see in a lot of professionally made cloud models, cloud VDBs, also famously in the Disney cloud model. And we can quite easily see what this node does if we turn on visualize density here. What this allows us to do is to specify a density of a cloud around the edge and an internal density in this area right here. Let's turn both of these on. And if I make the edge thickness a bit thicker, let's say a value of 0.5, we get this band of high thickness around the perimeter of our cloud, and then this area or this volume of low thickness in the inside of our cloud. And this is something, again, we can see in a lot of professionally made cloud models. I'm going to leave those values like this for now. And now it's finally time to move on to a first cloud noise. And in this case, this will be a cloud billowy noise. And this node offers us a ton of parameters to dial in and can be quite a rabbit hole. In this case, this is sort of the bare minimum of the values that I would tweak for a basic cloud in Houdini. Let's start out on the billowy noise tab. Or before we do so, we should check here override look, because the new Houdini cloud tools come with two looks or two visualizers. We have this ambient occlusion visualizer, which really highlights all the small details we have on a cloud, and also the reverse occlusion, which gives us a bit more realistic cloud shading in a viewport. In this case, I want to focus on the details, so I'm going to set this to ambient occlusion. And now let's focus on the noise tab in here. First of all, we have an amplitude and an element size, and you know this from pretty much any noise node in Houdini, so let's dial those in. The amplitude is something that I want to set to 1, and I want to set the element size to a value of 1.8. Then we could add wally details in here. What this basically does is blend a main noise with another noise, with a wally noise, to get areas that aren't as affected from this main noise that we're adding on top. And this is something you may want based on the types of clouds you're creating in the end. In this case, I want to turn this off, and I want to focus on this value correction right here. What this basically does, what these 4 sliders in here do, is act pretty much the same way as a curve effect in Photoshop. So with this, we can control the highlights or the shadows or the midtones of the noise that we're going to add to our cloud in here. And in this case, I'm going to work with the gain. And what the gain slider does is, if it's set to a value of 0.5, this imaginary curves node in Photoshop that we're thinking of is a straight line. And if we turn the gain down, we get more of an S curve. And if we turn the gain up, we get more of a Z curve. In this case, I want to turn the gain down to a value of 0.25 to really highlight all those small areas that we got here in our cloud. And this is all I want to change in here in this first noise tab. Next, let's move on to advection. Advection will iteratively distort our noise to create a bit more organic shapes. So I want to turn this on, and what worked nicely for me was an amplitude scale of 4 and an element size of 2. And now our blobs on our cloud are a lot more irregular, which I like. Next, let's move on to the processing tab. And the main thing that I want to change here is the number of noises. And this will basically give us control over how many of our main noises right here we are mixing together. And in the end, if we add more noises to our cloud, let's say to a value of 2, this will overall even the cloud a bit out and make those chasms in our different cloud shapes here a bit less deep, a bit less jarring. And finally, we have the attenuation tab in here. And for this, we have to turn on the iterations slider up here. What this will basically do is apply our cloud noise over and over and over, and with each iteration of a cloud noise, decrease the scale of a noise, the element size of a noise, and a few other parameters. And this really helps in getting very fractal looking and realistic looking shapes on a cloud noise. So let's turn this on. Let's move to the attenuation tab. And I want to work on the noise attenuation. And I want to set the amplitude and the element size both to a value of 0.5. So essentially what we're saying with this is we're halving the amplitude and the element size with each iteration step. This value that we're adding in here is simply multiplying our billowy noise with each iteration step. And we're done here, and this is all I want for my main cloud details, my main cloud noise. At this point, after our cloud billowy noise, we should adjust the cloud density profile again. So wire this node in again. Let's again turn on visualize density. And in this case, I just want to thin this right now very thick band of high density in my cloud. So for this, let's turn on internal density and let's set the edge thickness in this case to a value of 1.6, like this. And now this area is a lot more under control. And finally, I want to work on this bottom area of our cloud in here. And in the clouds that Attila Torok generated for the Houdini 20 release, this is where we added a lot of wispy details, which I think looks really, really good on a cloud. So I want to replicate this here as well. To do this, first of all, let's turn on visualize density again. And I first of all want to split my cloud into an upper part and a lower part. And again, I'm going to use a cloud clip node for this. Let's wire this in and let's dial in our values. For this, I want to invert the clipping, so we just get the lower half. I want to add some noise displacement to this. First, I'm going to use an amplitude of 3 and an element size of 5. And finally, I want to find a nice offset, in this case an offset of 6. And I'm just looking for some interesting peaks in some interesting areas of my general cloud shape in here. And also I want to add under the fractal tab the maximum octaves to 8 and the roughness to 6 to just add more details to this clipping plane. Now what this cloud node in the end gives us is two geostreams. This is the bottom half of a cloud and this is the top half. And for now I just want to work on the bottom half. And one thing that I should do with my cloud clip node in here is also adjust the distance. And I want to make this a bit smaller. In the end, I chose a value of 0.62 in here. And what I'm mainly looking for here are these areas where my cloud shape, my bottom clipping plane sort of breaks up and gets more interesting. Now again, I want to add some noise to this. For this, I'm going to use a volume noise fog. And on this noise fog, I want to set the operation to multiply. I'm going to set this to min-max. And I want to dial in a minimum value that's a bit negative, so we're cutting a bit more out of a cloud in here, and then a max value of, in this case, 3, which looked nice in the end for me. And then we have to dial in an element size, which in this case I'm going to set to 2. And this is not looking quite right, and in this case I choose the wrong operation. I don't want to use subtract, I want to use multiply, something like this. No, this is the end result that I want. And then finally, this volume noise fog can go into a cloud wispy noise, which is the other main cloud noise tab that we got with Houdini 20. Now, what a cloud wispy noise does, in contrast to a cloud billowy noise, is it will advect our cloud density along a certain noise vector field, which will pull our cloud apart a bit and create, again, those wispy details that we're after here. Again, we're going to start in the wispy noise tab. In this case, I want to up the amplitude a whole lot. I want to up this to a value of 25. I want to up the element size as well to a value of 2. And also I want an XYZ scale to my cloud noise in here. I want to squash this a bit along the y-axis and make this a value of 0.35. Now a cloud looks really, really chaotic. And this will change quite drastically as soon as we start playing with those substeps up here. Like with a cloud billowy noise, we have an iterations parameter up here, but we also have a substeps parameter, which makes the amplitude of the noise a lot smaller, but will apply it multiple times, which in the end usually looks a lot better. And if I, for example, turn this up to a value of 6, now we got a lot nicer wispy shapes appearing here. I'm not going to worry about advection for this cloud, but instead I'm just going to move on to the velocity. And with this, we can control the overall noise direction where our cloud gets pulled. And in this case, I want to enable a wind force as well. And I want to set this wind force a lot higher. You can see it sort of working here. And in this case, I'm going to choose a value of 1.4. Now, with a wind force here, I can scale this by a surface distance, which will add an effect that's a bit like the wind shadow in Vellum, where when areas are very close to an additional volume that we can pipe in right here, they won't be affected by the wind as much. Let's do this. This is this input right here. This expects an SDF. So let's create an SDF. For this, I'm going to use the other half of my cloud. And I want to use a convert VDB node to convert it into an SDF. Like this. Let's in here choose VDB and let's enable convert fork to SDF. And if you take a look at the info panel, we can see that this volume is still named density, which is the wrong name. This should be called surface. So let's use a name node to also rename this. Let's clear the number of namings and add one rename. And let's rename from density to surface like this. And now our volume has the right name as well. Then this can go into the second input of our cloud wispy noise. And let's enable scale by surface distance in here. And now we can see our wind has a lot less effect now on our overall geometry, our overall volume. We can dial this in. We have two parameters. We have one value, this distance min. This is the distance to our second volume where our wind speed is going to be 0. And we have a distance max, which is the distance from our second volume where our wind is at max speed. And I want to turn the distance max down to a value of 0.75. Now we have a wispy noise and we have our other cloud half with a billowy noise. Let's finally bring those two together. For this we're going to use a VDB combine node, wire both inputs in like this. And on our VDB combine, I want to set the operation either to add or to maximum, what works better for you. In this I'm going to choose maximum. And we got a full cloud back. Now, one thing that we're seeing right here, which I don't like, is that our wispy details down here are really hidden by that upper part of a cloud. If you take a look at it like this, we really can't see any wispy details showing through from the bottom. And the reason this is happening is that if we take a look at the domain of a volume, or the domain of a wispy volume right here, this brown box, we can see this is really small or really constrained to the main cloud shape that we're feeding in. And this is a problem because this gives our cloud wispy noise a lot less room to work with. So we have to increase the size of this brown box, and we can do this with a VDB activate node. And I'm going to use this before my volume noise fork node that I created earlier. Let's drop down a VDB activate, wire this in. Let's set the mode to expand. And let's set the expand distance to a value of 7, or 7 units in Houdini space. And now as soon as we do this, we can see we have a lot more wispy areas here on our cloud. And if you take a look at the VDB combine in the end, now this is the look that I'm going for. So finally, this is our cloud done. Let's drop down a null down here. And let's finally take a quick look at shading as well. For this, let's go to the Solaris viewport. We'll throw it into the stage context. Let's use a sub import node and select the out null that we created. Let's center our view here. And now let's work on shading. For this, I'm going to use a material library first to create my cloud material. Let's dive inside and let's search for cloud. And in this case, I want to use a Karma cloud material. And we're going to take a look at all of this a bit later. Let's first of all build the rest of our setup. Let's assign this cloud material to our cloud. And we should also rename our sub import here to cloud to keep our scene graph tree right here neat. And let's say in here autofill materials and assign to geometry, and let's wire in our cloud like this. We also need some lights in our scene, so for this let's add a Karma physical sky. On the physical sky I want to set the solar altitude to a value of 66 degrees and the solar azimuth to a value of 43 degrees, like this. I also want to go down to the base parameters of my sun, and I want to up the exposure to a value of 1.5. And I want to go into the sky tab, and in here I'm going to set an exposure of 0.05. Let's also add a camera. For this, let's first of all pick an angle to view a cloud from. Let's for now turn off the grid, and let's take a look at it a bit from the bottom like this, and control click on a camera icon to create a camera from a viewport perspective, and let's move it a bit closer to our cloud in the end. something like this. Next we need our Karma renderer, so let's drop this down. This will be our Karma render settings and our USD render up. Let's wire this in. And on my Karma renderer, I want to switch to the XPU engine. And I want to go into the limits tab and up my volume limit. Since we're going to scatter a lot of rays inside this cloud volume, I want to up this to a value of 32. This should be enough for pretty much every cloud you're going to render. And now finally, with all of this done, let's switch to our Karma XPU viewport. Let's wait a bit for all of this to cook. And now let's jump into a material library, into a Karma Cloud material. And let's take a look at this thing right here, this new Karma Pyro shader that we got in Houdini 20. And this is a Pyro shader or a volume shader that I ended up liking quite a bit, although it's a bit unusual when you first use it. Now in rendering volumes, there's usually 3 material properties that we care about. We have absorption, we have scattering, and we have emission. And I, first of all, while trying this, thought that this is what these 3 tabs right here above are. Smoke is absorption, scatter is scattering, and fire is emission. But this is not the case. What this in the end is smoke handles both absorption and scattering, while scatter and fire are both different cases of emission. We're not going to use emission in this case for this cloud, however, I can highly recommend reading the documentation on this node, which really goes into a lot of detail what those 2 tabs do. For now, I want to dial in my cloud values in here that I want. And I first of all want to get the density scale into the right ballpark. And again, this is something that's highly dependent on the physical size of your cloud. So for this size of cloud, around the value Houdini units of 10, I'm going to set the distance scale to 10 as well. If this would be around 1 meter or 1 Houdini unit, for example, I would want to set this to 100, so 10 times that. Next, I want to work on the colors. And for your usual realistic cloud, we want to set these 3 color values in here all to white, which is already set up. And we mainly want to work with the shadow density, which will control, again, how dark the shadows on my cloud are in the end. In this case, I want to up them a tiny bit. I want to up them to a value of 1.25 like this. And lastly, there are 3 values that we want to work with. We have the anisotropy, we have the roughness, and we have the extinction fall off. And I first of all want to dial in the extinction fall off. What this essentially does is for each volume bounce that we're doing while rendering, we're going to lower the density, the overall density of a cloud. So with every volume bounce, arrays that we shoot into a cloud have a higher chance to shoot out the other end and hit a light source. And this will greatly reduce the number of volume bounces that we need to get a realistic result. What we notice when we play with this slider right here, if we move this up to 0, we got no volume bounces at all. Our cloud looks very unrealistic. If we move our value slider up a tiny bit, we can see our cloud getting brighter and brighter and brighter. And that at some point, if we move it very far to the right, we can see something that almost looks like ambient occlusion in the end. And your goal here is to sort of find the area of maximum brightness for the cloud density that you're going for. And in this case, for this cloud, this is a value of 0.2. And then we have the anisotropy and the roughness. The anisotropy controls the way how light gets scattered if it hits a cloud. If it gets scattered mostly forward or mostly backward. And in clouds in general, this is mostly forward. So a value of 0.877, like it said here, is pretty much exactly what we want. And then we have the roughness, and this is again a value that changes different parts of a cloud shader with every volume bounce that we're doing. And what the roughness does, it with every volume bounce gets an anisotropy value closer and closer and closer to 0. So the uniform scattering. And what this in the end essentially does is really accentuate all the tiny details that we have in our cloud. So for example, if I turn this down to a very low value, we can see it down. This is a very, very fluffy cloud. We don't see many details at all. And if I up this a whole lot, maybe to a value of 2.2, now our cloud is a lot less fluffy and we see a lot more details. And in the end, we want to find the right balance here. And in this case, I'm going to choose a value of 1.5. And this is pretty much all there is to setting up a cloud in Houdini, which is, to be fair, a lot, but again, requires a lot less custom tools than before. And again, you're getting to a very realistic cloud, a very beautiful looking cloud, in my opinion, a lot sooner. So the only thing left to do for this setup that I'd do is go back to the OBJ context, go back into my cloud setup, find the VDB from particles node, decrease the volume size, for example, to a value of 0.05 or 0.025. I wouldn't get too small with this value, since this will increase the render time or the cook time quite a bit. And then I would go through my cloud billowy noise and maybe add another iteration right here, and maybe add a few more substeps for my cloud wispy noise until I like, in the end, the look of my cloud. But everything else in here should work the same as it does with a lower volume resolution right here. So this is all I have for you today, and until next time, it's cheers and goodbye. And if you like us and want to support us, or just want to learn more about Houdini in in-depth courses, consider becoming a patron of ours. And to everyone already supporting us, thank you so much. Without you, Antagma in this form would not be possible. With a special thank you going out to Mohamed Alabri, Omiya Ichigo, Joseph Howerton, and David Aiden. Thank you so much, guys.